Welcome back to Studying with Sarah. This is episode 1, part 2. Episode 1, part 1 is now up on my incredible YouTube channel, where I do actually have one video posted if you want to watch it. I strongly recommend it. Honestly, I forgot what was in it because I filmed it like early to mid September, and it's November 13th. Oops. So I was rewatching it. I was like, blight I had in my eyes, the joy, the excitement. Talked about a lot of things in that video that I never filmed a follow-up to. So really quick, we're gonna do that. So what I talked about in that beautiful video was I bought a bottle of wine shaped like a fish, and I was gonna drink it and I was gonna use the bottle for decoration. Well, don't worry, the wine tasted like ass. I'm not a big wine girl though. And then I tried to take the label off, failed. So now it's just sitting on my windowsill. So that's cool. Next thing I talked about, I repotted a plant. Don't worry, it froze the other night, and oops, I don't fucking know. And then my dragon fruit plant is still doing very well. This is really unfortunate and looks like a Pokemon character. What else did I talk about? I literally just watched it. I have no memory. Unsure. Okay, but between part 1 and now part 2, that hot guy responded. And dude, literally, these are the only people who watch my videos, which, my friends back in Texas, they have been just giving me fire responses to this man. And so, yeah. So, very excited about that. It is time check. It's now 9 p.m. Well, it's 8:53. It's now 9 p.m. We have, including this lecture, 4 to go. So we're gonna kind of power through these and just kind of get the big picture. I am coming up on Thanksgiving break. Thank fucking God. So I'm coming up on Thanksgiving break. Holy fucking shit. Which is great because for exams, I have been making, and this is something that maybe I shouldn't be making recommendations for future vet students, considering me, but what I've been doing is for every lecture or whatever, and I should be doing this like before the week of the exam, whatever. What I've been doing is I just make like a little summary sheet, and then to test active recall, I like split my sheet in half, and then this is the side that's active recall. And this is the longer side is a lot of the like extra details and stuff for if I'm confused by my active recall, I can go back and figure it out. So that's why this is a summary of this, which is a summary of the slides. You get it. So that's been cool. Like I'll make charts and everything. So that's nice. And then I've been doing that for anatomy too. Which I think is a little bit more helpful for something kind of something conceptual like cell physiology versus anatomy. I don't know how helpful the one for anatomy is. My exam grade would certainly say maybe it wasn't the most helpful thing to me. But we'll see how this goes. And if it doesn't go well, then disregard literally everything I just said about this might be a good tactic, because I don't fucking know. I'm still figuring this shit out before. I don't know, I've never been in vet school before. It's usually something you only do once. Okay. Family size, 200% more. Didn't realize I got the big bitch version of these fucking Cheez-Its. God damn. Sorry, Daisy. Hit my cat in the face with a blanket. My bad. Okay. I don't care if chewing bothers you. Sucks to suck. I don't know. But I will try and keep it to a minimum. Anywho, now what are we talking about? We are going to figure out, why did the dog die when I gave it phenoxybenzamine, which should have been an irreversible, non-competitive antagonist to epinephrine or norepinephrine. Why did my dog still die? We're gonna figure that out. So, to figure that out, we're gonna finish chewing this Cheez-It. Well, my dear, if you wouldn't lay on top of the blanket. Silly goose over here. So, to figure this out, we need to discuss pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. Those are the two main subcategories, at least right now for me, of pharmacology. So pharmacokinetics is, what does my body do to the drug? Pharmacodynamics is, what does the drug do to my body? So pharmacokinetics, what do I do to the drug? We have a acronym, kind of, it's ADME. I don't know why, I see, it just looks like Padme to me. So what is Padme doing? Besides dying. Rest in peace, Padme. Y'all, shout out to Padme. So, A in pharmacodynamics, nope, pharmacokinetics, is absorption. How is the drug being absorbed? If I give you a drug intravenously, it is going 100% into your plasma, because I'm giving it into your blood. That's usually where I want it to go, and then it'll go other places. So absorption, is it going straight into the blood? Or how is it getting in, basically? Transdermal, oral, IM, sub-Q, whatever. D, distribution. I've given it to you in some way. Where is it? Is it in the plasma? Is it in lipid? Is it in tissue? Is it somewhere else? Is it in organs? I don't know. M, metabolism. Usually we think of this in the liver. Liver is very important. Take care of your liver, but also drinks are fun sometimes. I don't know. So metabolism, we usually think about this in the liver. Are we oxidizing it? Are we reducing it? Are we modifying it in some way? Usually when we modify a drug, we are getting it prepared for excretion. You piss or shit it out, basically. So, pharmacokinetics, what is my body doing to the drug? How am I absorbing it? How am I distributing it? How am I metabolizing it? And how am I excreting it? Pharmacodynamics, we think of binding. So what is the drug doing to my receptor? Is it binding and stimulating, binding, or blocking? We think of, what do we think of? We think of activation. and then systemic response. So yeah, binding. How does the drug bind to the receptor? Activation. What does the drug do at the receptor? Activation is where it's stimulatory or inhibitory. Binding is, does it stay on or stay off? That's that K on, K off rate that we kind of talked about. Don't worry, there's another way to describe K on, which is K subscript 1 and K off, or K subscript -1. K on or K off, scientists, get it together. But regardless, the ratio between K on and K off is KD. So if we describe our KD, that's talking about the ratio of kind of how fast something binds versus leaving. So that's important to know. So that's binding, activation, and systemic response. Like it or not, if I give you a drug intended for your heart, I'm usually not just going to give it to your heart. And even if I am, guess what your heart does? It pumps shit to your body. So I cannot necessarily control where my drug is going to go exactly. I can target where I want my drug to go. And that's unfortunately where we have to think about a little math type stuff. So for systemic response, we need to be thinking about ion trapping. Usually if you add a charge to something, you lock it in place. And we need to be thinking about log p values. Log p values talk about, or are in reference to how well something like dissolves, or just how lipophilic something is, how much it likes lipids. I think, once again, I don't fucking know. So a high log p value means that it will do well in lipid, low, not so much. I don't know. That was from like the beginning of the semester, and now we're almost to the end of the semester. So I don't fucking know. Anyway, so pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics, that's the gist of it. Now, we need to talk about in vitro. We are looking at not the body, we're looking at some cells right now. We are going to be talking about binding studies. What are we looking for with a binding study? Concentration response, dose response, KD, we already talked about that. K on, K off, affinity, EC50, which we talked about last time. Last lecture, go back and watch it. Strongly recommend. Do whatever you want. So a binding study is done. I don't know if I need a whiteboard for this. We're just going to kind of raw dog this. So a binding study is done when we are developing a drug. When developing a drug and doing a binding study, we are just looking purely at the drug's affinity for a receptor. Yeah? So how much does my drug want to bind to my receptor? How much does it take up to my receptor? I don't fucking care if it does anything or what the effect is. I care, does it bind? Yes or no? That's my question, yes or no. And we think that's where the KD ratio comes in, the ratio of time on versus time off, KD. So, little hypothetical, not hypothetical, just a test question that my professor gave us is, does an agonist have a KD? Pretend this is Dora. This is your time to think and answer. The answer is yes. Well, yeah, the answer is yes. Our agonist binds and does something. Now, does an antagonist have a KD? Also yes, because it binds. I don't give a fuck about effect. I care, does it bind? That's KD. Does it bind? If so, how well? KD, we can also further define as the drug concentration when half of the receptors are occupied. So, this unfortunately means that, I do actually need the whiteboard, that everything is kind of relative, which is great. So, Kate, my eye fucking hurts, dude. So KD is the concentration of my drug where half my receptors are occupied. So if my cell has 4 receptors, no cell has 4 receptors. I'll tell you that right now. If my cell has 4 receptors, what is the concentration of my drug that I need to give that 2 of those 4 receptors are activated? We can scale that up too. Think about it. I don't know. So that's KD. KD is related to EC50. EC50 was the concentration of a ligand needed to reach half of the maximal effect. So it's related. So low KD means that we have high affinity. We need less of the drug to bind half of the receptors. High KD means that I have low affinity. So I need more drug to bind those receptors. This we think about, or this is why we talked about like second messengers and everything, because a response and a signal are not one-to-one. That's something that I have had to really remind myself of, is that just because I give you one drug does not mean that's one signal, right? Or that it's one receptor, you know? So it's all kind of relative. The concentration of the drug is plotted against effect. Yeah. So we have the binding study. What is the affinity of the drug to the receptor? Not effect. What is the affinity? KD is the ratio between the time that time that it takes to bind, which is K on, and the time that it takes to leave, which is K off. That's KD. KD is a measure of the concentration of my drug where half of my receptors are occupied. This is related to EC50, which is the concentration of a ligand needed to get half of my maximal response. So if I have a high KD, meaning I have a high ratio, that means that I have a low affinity for whatever. I need more of my drug to bind to receptors. If I have a low KD, I need less of my drug to bind those 2 receptors. Yeah? Okay, that was in vitro. So that's just on a very microcellular petri dish level. Now we're looking at in vivo. So we're looking at systemic response, which, you know, kind of matters a little bit more. You need to know the in vitro, but in vivo kind of matters too. So, oh my God, hold on, yawn break. Okay, so before we begin, there is a difference between concentration and dose, okay? Concentration is amount divided by volume. So mass or moles, whatever, divided by the volume that it's in. That gives you a concentration. Can you take a very accurate concentration of whatever in your body, in your dog's body, in your cow's body? No. You can, but it's a waste of fucking time. So what we do is we take the mass of or the weight of something. So that's why we say like mgs per kg of a drug, or you can do it with body surface area for like very toxic drugs. So it would be like mgs per meter squared. It's just another way of looking at it. So mgs per kg We are not looking at the overall concentration of your body because that is a waste of time. We are just giving you a dose, basically, relative to your body weight or your body surface area. So to get our dose measurement, that's where we're looking at pharmacokinetics, absorption, distribution, metabolism, excretion. All those play a role in this. So we look at dose response studies. This is how we figure out what dose we can give you safely. So dose response studies, we're looking at both pharmacodynamic, so what does the drug do to my body, and pharmacokinetic, what does my body do to the drug? So we're looking at the combination of the two. We are seeing, we're looking at the effects of binding, signaling, and pharmacokinetics. So like we had EC50, which was E concentration 50 or whatever, we now have ED50, because why give it a new name? So ED50, we're talking about dose. ED50 is what dose is needed to get half of my response. Dose, not concentration. So EC50 would be measured in a concentration, so like moles, millimoles, whatever. Dose, ED50, is going to be mg per kg. Grams per pound. I don't know, you get it. So that's dose. And with dose, or dose response studies, we need to remember the dose makes the poison. Things can be safe, things can be ineffective at low amounts, therapeutic, or I'm going to kill you. There is a range. The dose makes the poison. Depends on the poison, depends on the dose, right? So we are trying to figure out the potential toxicity of a drug with dose response studies. We want to see, or a measure that we use for this is TD50, which is the toxic dose. So what percent of my population will get toxic effects? So not lethal, toxic. That's TD50. LD50, on the other hand, is what percent of the population dies if I give them this drug dose. So TD50 is toxic effect, LD50 is lethal effect, ED50 is what dose I need to give you to get half of my response. Yeah? Okay. For an effective dose, there's going to be a range, yeah? That's your therapeutic index. That is how much window of, oopsie, that was too much or not enough. What is the window for that? That's my therapeutic index. That is kind of a ratio between LD50 and ED50. So the ratio between what percent of my population did I kill versus how much should I give you where I got half the response. You know, ideally we kill not 50% of the population. So anyway, we'll talk about that in a second. So a larger therapeutic index means you have more wiggle room to where it is safe to give something. Smaller, the guy messaged me again. Smaller therapeutic indexes means it's a less safe drug. You have less wiggle room before, oopsie, I killed you. So for just a relative ballpark after our Dr. Pepper break, relative ballpark to kind of get an idea of what we're rocking with. Relatively safe drugs, amoxicillin, penicillin, they have a therapeutic index, which once again is our lethal dose, our LD50 versus our ED50. So we have less than 100 to 1 for penicillin and amoxicillin. Mid-range drugs, morphine, diazepam, are less than 100 or 100 or less. So morphine, for example, is 70 to 1. It's a ratio of 70 to 1. So I can give you 70 times the normal dose of morphine before it is lethal for 50% of the population. Don't do that, but you could, you shouldn't. Dangerous drugs, cocaine, ratio of 15 to 1. So I can give you 15 times the amount before, oopsie, we need to call someone. Some like antifungals is a 4 to 1. It's pretty toxic. Because unfortunately it's easy to kill bacteria because you are not so similar to bacteria. It is harder to kill fungi. Fungi and you are more similar than we care to think. So we have to be very careful with that. A lot of our chemo drugs, cisplatin, digoxin, think shit like that, is a ratio of less than 3 to 1. So it's a very narrow dosing range. So we just need to keep that in mind. Now we're just going to go through some general terms and their definitions and everything. So a dose response study. I'm looking at this is in vivo. So I'm looking at what dose do I need to give you to get 50% of my maximal effect. Dose, not concentration. So we're looking at mg per kg, mg per meter squared, shit like that. ED50 is the dose with which I get 50% of the population showing a therapeutic effect. Ideally, I'd want more than 50% of my population to see a therapeutic effect, because if I'm making something that only works half the time, it's not helpful at all. It is, but not really. So we can also do ED99, where, sorry, I got a long message from Tinder and I was like, no, did I get in trouble? There's no reason I should, but I don't know. So ED99, where we are looking at what dose does 99% of the population get a therapeutic effect, which is what most pharmaceutical companies look at. Then we have TD50, that toxic dose, where 50% of my population sees toxic effects. What dose is that? Then we have LD50. What dose does 50% of my population die? That's not good. You don't want 50% of your population to die. That's really bad. So we look at LD1. What dose does 1% of my population die? So with a lot of drugs that are actually produced and sent out into the world, your pharmaceutical companies are looking at ED99, well, LD1 over ED99. So they're looking to see what dose is 99% of my population benefiting from versus what dose is 1% of my population dying. Is that safe or not? So based on that, either LD50 or ED50 or LD1, ED99, that will give you your therapeutic index. Larger therapeutic index, safer drug. Okay? Now we've kind of gotten that kind of background figured out, we are going to talk about more of our clinical correlation. Why did the dog die? Because we've talked about all that stuff. Why did the dog die? We still need a little bit more background, but that's where we're going, just by the way. So now what we're going to do is we're going to compare ED50 and KD50. Now this bit gets me a little confused. We'll see if talking it out. I gotta put on my glasses for this. That's how you know it's fucking bad. So we'll see how this goes. So I just need to like, fuck, I hate this shit. So EC50. EC50. Half, or what? Let's just do what drug concentration? Well, no, that's not right. Yeah, okay, whatever. What concentration gives me 50% of my effect? KD50, what concentration binds half of my receptors? If I'm in a scenario where EC50 is equal to KD50, never fucking happens, but if it does, it's not going to. If it does, cool. That makes my life easier, because that means that when I gave you, or that my effect is is related, is a 1-to-1 of how many receptors I have. Yeah, that makes sense, kind of. So the potency, which is EC50, is equal to the affinity. Yeah? Doesn't happen. By the way, another way of phrasing this is the magnitude of the response is directly related to the amount of receptors bound. So response equals percent bound, which in this scenario tells us that receptors binding is going to be your limiting step, because if I don't have as many receptors as I need, my response is not going to change, right? So what does that mean? In a scenario where, once again, I have 4 receptors in a cell, if I give you 4 receptors and I'm looking at what percent or what concentration of drug is going to give me 50% of the effect, and it equals the amount of drug that is going to bind half my receptors, I'm looking at 2 of my receptors, right? So I will get a ratio of 50% of my receptors are bound and 50% of my receptors are active, versus 50% of my receptors are not bound and they are therefore inactive. So that's a simple scenario. Does not happen. Now, have I been saying KD50? If I have, disregard, it's just KD. So now if I'm in a scenario where my if my EC50 is less than my KD, so if the amount needed to get half of my effect is less than the amount that gets me half of my receptors bound, okay, that means that my potency, which is EC50, is greater than my affinity, because I needed less drug to bind half my receptors. Okay, that makes sense just in a roundabout way. I hate when that happens. Okay, in this scenario, or let's also do it in another way. The magnitude of the response is greater than the percent bound. Yeah, because it's more potent. We need less to get the amount. This indicates that the signaling event, so EC50 kind of, is the limiting effect or limiting step, right? Rather than receptors binding being the limiting effect, we're now saying that the signaling is the limiting effect because of the potency and affinity, I think. So, in the scenario that we have, we're going to increase this. If we have 8 receptors, we're only looking at 4 because of KD. KD is looking at half of the receptors. So technically, while I do have 8 total, 4 are active, or sorry, 4 are bound. Okay, 4 are active, that's the same shit. So I have 8 receptors, but 4 pathways. So already that gives me a ratio of 2 receptors to 1 path. Meaning, if I put in my drug, I will technically get 50% of my receptors bound because I have 8 total, but 4 are being bound. But I have 100% of my signal, right? Because all of my receptors that I'm looking at, the 4 of them are bound because my drug is potent. We can logic that one out for the exam, right? Sure. Anyway, so with potency being greater than affinity, and with my signaling event being the limiting step, but this still working, that indicates, apparently, that there are more receptors. Oh, okay. That indicates there are more receptors than active pathways, or than signaling pathways. Because in our example where you have 8 receptors, 4 pathways, I have extra receptors. I have 4 extra receptors that are not being used. The 4 that are being used are 100% active and 100% bound. But I have another 4. I have 4 left over. So there are spare receptors elsewhere. There are receptor reserves. So your body, in systems that we care a lot about, we have redundant receptors. We have the National Guard of receptors, except they're not being deployed to Chicago or New York or Washington, because that's not what they're there for. In case you're wondering, that's not what they're there for. Anywho, I digress. You have spare receptors. They can be activated when necessary. With signaling pathways with reserves, that means that even if the reserves are not active, we still get 100% of our effect, even with those receptors spared, right? Without spare receptors, or once our spare receptors are all gone, they've all been used up, then we can have an irreversible inhibitor lower Emax, so lower the overall response, which is what we want in the case of our dead dog, right? we need something that's going to bind every single receptor, lower the response, then we can operate on the dog, right? Yeah. So what systems would we have spare receptors for? Well, we would have spare receptors for systems that are so fucking important that we really don't want to lose this shit. Case in point, your blood pressure. A little bit important. In case you're wondering, it's pretty important. Blood pressure, heart rate, they're not necessarily one and the same, they're related. So very vital systems. Your body wants to make sure that if something happens, say I give you an irreversible non-competitive antagonist, if something happens, I have backups. And if my backups are gone, we're dead. Sucks. So, spare receptors. So what happened with our dog? Well, spare receptors. So let's just recap on our dog. Our dog, he presents with a pheochromocytoma, which is secreting catecholamines, norepinephrine, epinephrine. And we want to do surgery. We want to get that tumor out of there because we don't want these dramatic, sympathetic, random responses for our dog. However, if I make your tumor mad, I'm going to kill the dog because it's going to cause such a dramatic, sympathetic event that I'm going to have hemodynamic instability, meaning your heart rate is so over the place that you fucking die. That's hemodynamic instability, basically. So how am I going to counteract the effects of epinephrine release from the tumor preoperatively, so that I can get this dog through surgery? Well, I wanted to give a non-competitive, irreversible antagonist. So I gave phenoxybenzamine, which is an irreversible, non-competitive antagonist of alpha-adrenergic receptors, which should have blocked my epinephrine receptors from responding to the epinephrine released from my dog. But it didn't. Why didn't it do that? Phenoxybenzamine, the low tolerable doses, are not enough to overwhelm the receptors, overwhelm the spare receptors that this dog has and that we all have. So low tolerable doses of phenoxybenzamine will raise the concentration needed to get half of our effect, but they will not lower the effect. They will not lower the response. They will increase the amount needed, but they will not change the result. So if my body or if my tumor is so mad, it can outcompete the non-competitive antagonist, basically. So why don't I just give the dog a fuck ton more? Because of my therapeutic index. I can't just increase the phenoxybenzamine because the amount that my dog would need, or the amount of drug that the amount of drug that would effectively block every spare receptor would kill my dog. So regardless, I've killed my dog. It's just which way. So yeah, adding enough phenoxybenzamine to get rid of all my receptors creates enough toxicity that it does not outweigh the benefit of attempting surgery. The therapeutic index is too small. In this case, you're not leaving with the dog. Sorry. That's a depressing case correlation, but it's important to know for whoever. So, spare receptors, very important. Let me just go back to the beginning of this slide, or of this thing, to make sure I can talk through everything. So, pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics. Pharmacokinetics are what does my body do to the drug. We have absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion. Pharmacodynamics is what does the drug do to my body. So we look at binding, we look at activation, and we look at systemic response. In vitro, we are looking at binding studies so with binding studies, we're looking at KD, which is the ratio of how fast something binds versus leaving. That tells us the concentration of a drug needed to bind half of our receptors, which is related to EC50, which is the concentration of our drug. My cat's being weird, sorry. The concentration of our drug that would give us half of the maximal effect. So the ratio of those, potency versus affinity, basically. So if I have a low KD, that means I have a high affinity. I need less to bind the same. If I have a high KD, I have a low affinity. Vice versa, yeah? So that was in vitro. That's in a petri dish. In vivo, I'm looking at systemic response. So we're looking at how our drug dose is measured. So ED50, it's effective. Oh, there it is. It's effective dose. I was like, what the hell is E? Effective dose. So effective dose, ED50, is what dose do I or can I give that will give benefits to half of my population, versus LD50, which is what dose will kill half my population. And then we also have TD, which is toxic dose. So how do those all compare? Then for what the hell does that tell us? That's where we're looking at the kind of confusing thing where we have the like KD equals or is greater than ED, or whatever, you get it. So that's where we talk about spare receptors. In an ideal world, the concentration needed to get half of my effect is the same as the dose needed to get half of my receptors bound, to be a 1-to-1. The potency and affinity would be the same, right? That's not how that works though. So if we have EC50 less than KD, that tells us that the concentration needed for half my response is less because it's more potent. So potency is now higher than affinity, which means that now my signaling is the limiting step. Whereas before it was my receptor binding, now it is my signaling. So with my signaling being the limiting step, somehow, and I don't fully understand this, but somehow it tells us there are extra receptors out there. And with extra receptors, that means that we need to consider kind of, is it worth it to give enough of a dose to block all those receptors? Yes or no? In a good scenario, like the reason that those receptors, the spare receptors, are there is if an important body system like my blood pressure gets fucked up by something, I have backups. I have something that can override and almost outcompete a non-competitive antagonist. So it's just a backup system. It's your backup generator, basically. Okay, now we are going to be looking at the cell cycle. This is just a very brief overview of mitosis. Believe it or not, I do have a degree in science. It does not feel like it most days, but I do. So I've gone through mitosis a few times. So we're going to go through the basic cell cycle and mitosis, which I hope we all know, bro. So we start with the cell cycle, not mitosis. The cell cycle is long, mitosis is just a part of it. We start with G1, gap 1. That is where if my cell has decided it wants to, it is going to grow. I still have one set of chromosomes, but my cell gets bigger. S phase is synthesis. That is where DNA replication begins. That's where I have the polymerase, helicase, topoisomerase, all that shit. G2 is I'm growing the second stage or the second set of chromosomes. So I replicated my DNA. Now I've doubled it, right? After that point, I go into mitosis, and that's where we get prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, cytokinesis, or telekinesis. I split the cell. So there's that. There's another phase where at G1, my cell can decide I'm actually good, and it can go into G0, which is the quiescent phase. That's just where my cell's like, I'm good, guys. I did my job. I'm chill. And when we're in G0, we are not dividing. We are not replicating. We're not dividing. Then mitosis, prophase, everything condenses. My centrosomes duplicate, so I get 2 poles on either cell. We see that start to happen. Prometaphase, it's a halfway point. The centrosomes have moved to opposite sides of the cell, so they're now kind of opposite each other. And the nuclear envelope disassembles. We now have condensed our chromosomes, and now we have released them. Yes. And now we've released them from their cage, basically. Metaphase, we have microtubules, which are a part of our centrosomes. We have them create the metaphase plate. That's where we get our chromosomes lined up in the center of our cell. The centrosomes in anaphase are then going to help pull the daughter chromosomes apart towards chromatids, whatever, or pulled apart to their respective poles. Telophase, now we have my chromatids on either side with my centrosomes. My nuclear envelopes are going to reform, so now I have 2 envelopes, chromosomes on either side. Cytokinesis, my cell is going to split. Then I can go into interphase. Interphase is just G1, S, and G2. That's just my sitting and growing. So that's very basic mitosis and cell cycle. Now we're going to talk about regulations, the different checkpoints. Why do we have checkpoints? Where are the checkpoints? How do we regulate that? So checkpoints are decision points. They make sure that, is the cell sure? Do you really want to do that? The most important one is between your G1 and your S phase. Once we go into S phase, we are committed to making 2 sets of DNA. It just kind of has to happen. So at G1, we have gone through the phase, or we've gone through the process of my cell getting bigger, right? I've not started growing or duplicating my DNA. I have just grown in size. So at the G1 or S/S checkpoint, that is the main checkpoint. I am looking to see Do I have the correct growth signals? Is my cell the correct size? Is my DNA already fucked up? If yes, you don't get to proceed. If no, go right ahead, buddy. So I'm going to talk about what like signals and proteins are involved in each checkpoint, and then we can go back and kind of talk through things. So with checkpoint 1, the GS or the G1 and S checkpoint, we have cyclin-dependent kinases. Those help to integrate checkpoints. So I guess I do need to draw this out. Fuck. So I think I said in the last video, your body is so incredibly smart, but so fucking stupid too. So we need to have so many backup plans for if your body decides to be really dumb. We need to figure out, how do I make you less dumb? And this is one of the ways, CDK. Which is cyclin-dependent kinases. Okay, so this is the most beautiful drawing you've ever seen in your entire life. Everyone say it with me. Wow, Sarah, that's the most beautiful drawing I've ever seen in my entire life. Thank you. So this is your cyclin-dependent kinase. It's inactive because my phosphate is here, or it's been phosphorylated here. That's no good. What do I need to do to make it active? Well, I need to remove this phosphate, and I need to add a phosphate in another location. Then I need to bind cyclin. When I do that, now my phosphorylation's over here, I've bound cyclin. What I can do is I can get different signals that will then tell my cell whether or not it can move. Unless CDK has all the signals it needs, it will not move. It's like at a restaurant when they tell you, is every member of your party here? If the answer is not yes, you're not doing anything. Which, like, okay, from a restaurant perspective, I understand that 1,000,000% it must be so annoying if someone's like, I need a table for 14, and then 2 people show up. Waste of space, waste of time, waste of reservation. But like, girl, if I have 5 out of 6, let me sit down, damn. Whatever, I digress. So, my braid just got caught on my whiteboard. So what are the signals that CDK is going to be looking at? Well, it's going to be looking at phosphatase, which removed our phosphate, yeah. It's going to be looking at kinase, and added our phosphate. And it's going to be looking at cyclin. Can cyclin bind, basically? Sorry, oh God. I'm having a... So, that was fucked. I'm sorry. So, now, all 3 of those signals... Water break, hold on. Okay, cool. So those signals, they check for, once again, growth signals, cell size, and DNA damage. There are different proteins involved with this whole thing too, which we will also talk about. But going back to CDK, the inputs of CDK. So this is going to be like the biggest mindfuck you've ever heard. In order for a cell to divide, it needs to get growth signals. Those growth signals are called growth factors. Crazy, dude. These almost always signal through tyrosine kinase receptors, which are different from G protein receptors. I kind of like tyrosine kinase more because they do this cool thing where they dimerize. So you ever put 2 magnets together and they lock together? It's like that. So you get your little woo, it binds on one, and when that one binds, your other one doosh, comes over, and then a response happens, and it's kind of cool. It's a big, like, insulin and shit like that. Oh, insulin-like growth factor, epithelial growth factor, platelet growth factor, erythropoietin, like that. It's really fucking cool. Little side note, when I was in a few repro classes, we talked about, we called them RTKs, receptor tyrosine kinases. When we talk about RTKs, I'm not fucking with you for a month. And we met in that class like 2 days a week for an hour each. So like 8 hours? That doesn't sound like a lot, but to talk about one single receptor type, it gets a little much. So whether or not I remember those, unsure. Anyway, so growth factors, epithelial derived, epithelial, platelet derived, insulin like, and then erythropoietin. We also have steroid hormones. We've already talked about those. Last video, go back. So steroid hormones, estrogen, take a wild fucking guess. That's going to be that's going to be a growth signal for female reproductive cell growth. Testosterone for male reproductive cell growth. For CDK, it has kind of a fun named pathway type shit. When we are looking at growth signals, most at this point epithelial growth factor, we have, gotta draw this shit. Hold on. We have our receptor, which this is an RTK receptor, so it's the one that's going to dimerize. It's really fucking cool. So they're just kind of chilling next to each other, but they don't like talk to each other right now. They need that one. It's like when you have those friends who they like each other, but they're not going to hang out with each other unless they have that friend by proxy that then forces them to hang out together. That's RTK receptors in my mind. So what does that mean? I have my two receptors. They don't talk to each other. Epithelial growth factor binds, they dimerize, and then I get this cross phosphorylation through an adapter protein called son of sevenless. Does that not sound like a Deadliest Catch ship name? I think it does. Anywho, so son of sevenless is involved in cross phosphorylating RTK receptors for cell growth. This is for cell checkpoint number 1. So son of sevenless is involved with that. Son of sevenless is also going to be an exchange factor for GDP. So it's going to change GDP to GTP. And it's going to do that when GDP is associated with a protein called RAS. Now, you may be thinking, RAS, I've never heard RAS before. Yeah, it's that long pathway in the kidney, also called RAS. Nothing to do with this. Isn't that cool? Isn't that fun? We love that, right? Yeah. So, son of sevenless changes GDP associated with RAS. It changes it to GTP, which once again is usually the active form of things. That change, that exchange, happens via son of sevenless in this pathway. Now, GTP on RAS goes through a bunch of shit, and we get a MAP kinase pathway. Now, the full MAP kinase pathway is kind of dumb, in my opinion. You get MAP kinase, which then gets phosphorylated into MAP kinase, which then gets phosphorylated into MAP kinase. MAP kinase can then enter into the nucleus and will activate a few transcription factors. So they're not proteins, they're factors. The ones that we primarily look at are called Jun, Phos, and Myc. I don't know. So Jun, Phos, and Myc are factors that go to your DNA and they cause altered expression of stuff. With the altered expression of stuff, we can then make three things. We make G1 cyclin. We make G1 CDK. We know CDK. And then we get E2F. G1 cyclin is going to push us through to the cell signal, basically. Yeah. And then so that would be a positive signal for cell growth. My epithelial growth factor binds to its receptor, causes it to dimerize. Once it dimerizes, son of sevenless cross-phosphorylates. When you cross-phosphorylate an RTK receptor, you lock it into place. So it can't just disassociate. It's like, no, I don't want to talk to you. You are not allowed to. Son of sevenless locks them together. That's the cross-phosphorylation. So they are now locked together. Son of sevenless changes GDP for GTP when it is attached to RAS. RAS, now attached to GTP, goes through the MAP kinase, MAP kinase pathway. MAP kinase goes into your nucleus and activates transcription factors Jun, Myc, and Phos. Jun, Myc, and Phos alter DNA expression, resulting in the production of G1 cyclin, G1 CDK, and E2F. So that's a positive signal. Now, a negative signal would be at first the same stuff, kind of, right? So I have my receptor, it has been dimerized, it's been cross-phosphorylated, so it's stuck together, blah, blah, blah. And now what we have, instead of son of sevenless and instead of RAS, we have PI3K. PI3K fucks with something in the membrane called PIP2, which I think is an adorable name. It's like phosphoenol phosphatase or something 2. I don't know. And it changes PIP2 into PIP3. PIP3 can then go to PDPK1, which stands for PIP3 dependent protein kinase. I don't know. So if we increase the amount of PIP3 dependent protein kinase 1 is now active. They need to make this fucking names shorter. So now with PDPK1, we can go to a new thing called AKT. AKT is going to block apoptosis. And it's going to block cell cycle arrest. So is that a negative linked or a negative signal in that it stops it from progressing? No. But it is a negative signal because to proceed, it has to block something. Positive signals are to proceed, we have to continue to do something. So let's walk through this pathway together. The purple is your positive signal. The brown, I don't know. The brown is your negative signal. So these are my non-associated receptors. This is epithelial growth factor receptor, which is an RTK. My epithelial growth factor comes, my things bind. When they bind, they are cross-phosphorylated. Son of sevenless, once they're cross-phosphorylated, associates with them. Son of sevenless exchanges GDP, which is on RAS, for GTP. Now RAS is active. RAS is then going to go through your MAP kinase. Yeah, MAP kinase. MAP kinase goes into your nucleus, causes the activation of June, Mic, and Phos, which are transcription factors. June, Mic, and Phos fuck with your DNA. They make G1 cyclin, G1 CDK, and E2F, which are signals to proceed through the cell cycle. Another signal that happens on the same time, your same stuff is activated. So these are the same receptors. Cross-phosphorylated, they're locked in. On this thing though, sorry, I'm just trying to get the slide off of my thing so that I can just do this from memory. So for the negative signals, we have P13K, which is going to change PIP2 into PIP3. PIP3 goes to PDPK1, which is PIP3 dependent protein kinase 1, which if you increase PIP3, you have to increase that one, or it makes it active. When it's active, it goes to AKT, whose name, or for what that stands for, I don't remember. AKT stops the apoptosis signal, says no, don't kill yourself. And it stops the cell from proceeding through the cell cycle. If that makes sense. So that's that. That is epithelial growth factor. That's how that works. Now we are going to be talking about another type of growth signal. This one is called Wnt. And these next few things that we're talking about were discovered in fruit flies first. Oh my gosh, I just remembered what RAS stands for. Rat-associated sarcoma. There it is. Because they found it in a rat. So that's that. There we go. Hey, now we all know. So with Wnt, dude, damn, I'm tired. Okay. I mean, I'm gonna wake up early. I'm gonna finish this lecture, try and mentally walk through the past lectures that I did today. So I did eicosanoids, signaling dynamics, pharmacology, cell cycle, or I'm on cell cycle now. Wait, what am I on? Yeah, I'm on cell cycle. Okay. I'll walk through those, go to bed, wake up early, finish the last two lectures, review everything, crush the test. One test closer to my degree, one test closer to this degree. Okay, anyway, so ooh, hear my jaw. Okay, this pathway is kind of confusing. I think I need to re-watch this part of the lecture because I am confusion. I have a bunch of arrows. They don't really make sense. So I'm going to re-watch that part of the lecture tomorrow morning, and we'll kind of go from there. What we can talk about though is CDK inputs. So cyclin inputs. They're called cyclin because guess what they cycle? Oh my God. So when we're going through different phases of the cell cycle, different cyclins spike, right? I thought I had just had like an epiphany about something. No. Anywho, so we will draw out our cell cycle things. You know, not to say that I didn't think that I would ever like be here, because obviously like I worked really hard to get the opportunity to, you know, be in vet school, which is already like a big achievement. And that's, you know, that is me tooting my own horn. It's fucking hard to get into vet school. And I did. And I got into a hard vet school, or I got into a really good vet school too. So it is a privilege and something that I worked very hard to get to. But sometimes, like right now, I'm thinking, why? Why'd you do that? Why are you doing this? Because I have a headache. I've had a headache since 1 o'clock. I took some Advil, which we now know how that works. Hey. Took some Advil. Headache's still there. I had breakfast. Didn't really have lunch. Didn't really have dinner. I got out of class I got into class at 8 a.m. Got out of class at 5 p.m. And I have been studying ever since for one exam, which is not even that bad. Next year, we're going to be taking multiple exams per week. How am I going to manage that? All that to say, what a privilege it is to be here. But at the same fucking time, oh my God, what an ordeal it is to be here. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Like, there are many, I would say more often than I have thoughts of like, girl, what the fuck? More often than not, all I can think of is, dude, hell yeah, I get to do this? Fuck yeah. Like, that's my thoughts most of the time. Like, driving into the school, I'm like, dude, what a fucking privilege. Like, before exams in undergrad, I would go park in the vet school parking lot and I'd be like, okay, I need to do good on this exam so that one day I'll be here. And now I am there. Okay, cool. Okay, don't think about that too hard, otherwise I'm gonna get too happy and then I'm gonna cry. Anyway, we're going to finish up fucking cell cycling after whatever that weird fucking tangent was. In conclusion, it is a privilege to be able to be educated. It is a privilege to learn. Learning is fun if you don't cram it all in. Which is why I'm recording this, because it's kind of fun. It's a privilege to learn. It's a privilege to be here. Sometimes it sucks shit, though. That's just how the cookie crumbles. So the cycling cycles. Anyway, so with the different phases of the cell cycle, we have different cyclins active at different phases. Feels weird to just transition, but I don't know what else to say about vesicle. I don't know, it sucks, but it's great. So cyclin D is active pretty much throughout the entire cell cycle. So from G1 to M, it's pretty much just always active. It's a general regulator. When we have our G1S checkpoint, we have a rise in cyclin E, which is activating CDK. Once CDK, that cell or cyclin-dependent kinase, gets phosphorylated, it turns off cyclin E. So cyclin E, we see that steep rise. See that steep rise. We go through our checkpoint. Our CDK phosphorylates cyclin E falls. It is destroyed. From S to G2, we get cyclin A. Cyclin A comes up. CDK phosphorylates it. Once we've gone through the checkpoint, it's destroyed. Cyclin B is rising. For G2 to M, CDK comes, phosphorylates it, it falls. So we just get these cycles. If you understand female repro, it's very similar to oocyte maturation and degradation until one finally succeeds. It's very similar to that. So to go more into the G1S checkpoint, because as we said, that is your committed step. That's a big mama step, okay? You need to make sure that what you're doing is smart. And if it isn't, you shouldn't be doing it. So how do we do that? We do that through P53. If anyone's taken a basic level biology class, you should know what P53 is. P53 is a very important cell cycle regulatory step. It is a negative regulator. So if it if it sees that I'm not drawing this out, I'm just going to talk through it. If you don't get it, too bad. So P53 is kind of checking out your DNA when your cell's like, I want to move out, I want to go through things. Your P53 is going to look, and if it sees any damage, it basically releases P21. P21 goes to your CDK complex and inhibits it. So it stops it from going through that part of the cell cycle. Another thing that happens is we have retinoblastoma proteins, which was found in retinoblastoma. So retinoblastoma protein, or PRB, binds to E2F. We heard of E2F when we were talking about epithelial growth factor, June McFoss, all that shit. June McFoss created G1 CDK, G1 cyclin, and E2F. This is E2F again. So E2F is a transcription factor involved in making DNA polymerase, helicase, topoisomerase. So it's very important. E2F is expressed highly in S phase because that's when we're synthesizing new DNA. In the G1, or going into the S phase, G1, we build up the transcription factor for those things. So that's where it's coming from. So with retinoblastoma protein being bound to E2F, E2F is inactive. It will not do anything. It cannot make DNA polymerase, helicase, topoisomerase. We cannot replicate DNA when they are bound. They are only bound if P53 senses damage, releases P21, which inhibits the CDK pathway, right? Because the CDK pathway, when things are fine, CDK phosphorylates retinoblastoma protein, causing it to release E2F. But if P21 says no ma'am to CDK, CDK cannot let E2F go. So it's inhibited. So P21, therefore P53, stops that. If E2F in a normal situation goes to the nucleus, genes for DNA replication. So what that means is if for some reason retinoblastoma protein cannot bind to E2F, E2F is always active because it doesn't need CDK to force retinoblastoma protein to let it go because it was never bound in the first place. So it can just keep making DNA polymerase transcription factors, causing that to happen. So your cell cycle is always happening. It is always trying to create new DNA, which is not good. Your cells have one copy of DNA for the most part, or for most of the time, for a reason. You don't want all that extra DNA. It causes bad shit like tumors. Not good. So if we think conceptually, if we had a mutation in P53, we're fucked, right? So if we have a mutation in P53 where it is just not working, it does not sense damage or whatever, it cannot release P21. P21 cannot inhibit CDK1 or to CDK. So it cannot inhibit CDK, which means that CDK can always just let E2F go from PRB. If E2F is released, we just keep making transcription factors for DNA and therefore genes for DNA replication. That's not good. So that's how you get cancer a lot of the times, is we have a mutated retinoblastoma protein. We see this in some canine osteosarcomas, which was our just clinical correlation for today. So reviewing this lecture in general, the basic steps of the cell cycle. We have G1, things are growing. S phase, we are replicating, or well, we're synthesizing, but we're synthesizing DNA replication. G2, we are, we're just kind of sorting out what we've made. N phase is mitosis. Then we go back into G1. If at that point our cell is like, yeah, I'm good, we can go into G0, which is our quiescent phase, where our cell is done dividing. We have 3 checkpoints. We have our checkpoint from G1 to S, which is our main regulatory checkpoint. At that point, we're looking for cell size, growth factors, and any DNA damage. We have proteins involved in that, including P53, PRB, and other ones. Then we have a checkpoint between G2 and S, and then between S and G2, yeah. And then G to an M. Is that fucking right? That can't be right. That was not right. So we have checkpoint G1 and S, G2 and M, and then M, of course. So I was right about G1 checkpoint. G2, we're checking for DNA replication. Was that done correctly? Is there damage? And is my cell big enough to poop? M checkpoint, we're making sure that our spindles have been attached. So our centrosomes, have those been attached and whatever. And then do we have the correct amount of chromosomes in each cell? So that's what that is. Now, for integration, or for just G1S, we're looking at, not just for G1S, but for, we're looking at CDK, which is cyclin-dependent kinase, to make cyclin-dependent kinase kind of active. We originally have phosphorylation kind of in the upper left. We need to remove that with the kinase, with the phosphorylase. Then we phosphorylate another site via kinase, and then we have cyclin bind. When that happens, we can then proceed through the cell cycle. We have different inputs for CDK. The one that I understand the most is epithelial growth factor, which is an RTK receptor, meaning once it binds, it dimerizes, cross-phosphorylates. Son of sevenless associates with it. Son of sevenless is an adapter exchange protein where it exchanges GDP for GTP for RAS, rat-associated sarcoma protein. So once GTP is on RAS, we can go through the MAP kinase pathway. MAP kinase goes into our nucleus, causes transcription of Jun, Myc, and Phos, which are transcription factors. Those then alter DNA expression, which gives us G1 cyclin, G1 CDK, and E2F. That's that. That's a positive signal. A negative signal is when we have our epithelial growth factor, we dimerize, we cross phosphorylate, and we get, what is it? It's something that changes PIP2 to PIP3. PIP3 goes, oh my God. Wow. Goes to, I need to go to bed. PIP3 goes to PDPK1, which is PIP3 dependent protein kinase 1. When we get an increase in PIP3, we activate PDPK1. PDPK1 goes to AKT. AKT blocks the apoptosis signal and blocks the cell cycle arrest signal. So we have a positive signal for continuing through the cell cycle, which is our MAP kinase, son of sevenless, all that shit, Jun, Myc, Phos, those are positive. Negative is our PIP3, we're stopping apoptosis and cell cycle arrest via AKT. So there's that. Yeah. Then we have those positive and negatives. Then we have Wnt, which I don't understand, and I need to watch back again and try and think on that. So we have Wnt. Don't understand what the fuck's happening with that. And then just the concept of cyclins are kind of the time keeper, basically. for cell cycle. So we see a regression and growth of different cyclins at different parts of the cell cycle. Across the overall cycle, we have cyclin D, which is just a regular regulator, I don't know. Then from G1 to S, we have E. I feel like Markiplier. E. I'm so fucking smart. We have E. So we have cyclin D overall. From G1 to S, we have cyclin E. From from S to G2, we have cyclin M. And then from S to M, we have cyclin A. Fuck! There's no cyclin M. It goes DEAB. The DEA. Bad. So cyclin D, general. Cyclin E is the first one. Cyclin A, cyclin B. Okay. And then when we have that rise in whatever cyclin, we activate CDK, which phosphorylates that cyclin, which ends that signal. So we just see that there's always this to get rid of things. Yeah. And then for kind of regulators of the cell cycle, like when it would stop the cell cycle, is P53 and then PRB. So P53 is just kind of scanning the DNA. If it sees anything whack, it releases P21. P21 can go to your CDK complex type thing, and it will inhibit your complex. When your complex is inhibited, it means that your PRB cannot release E2 or E2F. If E2F cannot be released, then we cannot have the transcription factors for a lot of DNA synthesis things, meaning we cannot proceed into the S phase. Oh my god. I woke up my cat by yawning that hard. Jesus fuck. So that's important. If we have a mutated PRB that cannot hold on to E2F, we just see cell cycle proliferation because E2F is not being reined in at all. P53 can be working perfectly, P21 can be working perfectly. They can inhibit CDK all they want, which will then like block PRB, but if PRB isn't holding on to E2F, it doesn't fucking matter what you do to PRB. So E2F, not great. If you have a mutation of P53, you just kind of stop the cycle, or stop the stopping of the cycle earlier, if that makes sense. And then runaway cell division is tumor. In tumor can be bad. Yeah, that was a little bit of a doozy. Holy fuck. Okay. We understand icosanoids. Okay, icosanoids, just really quick. We'll see how long that fucking lasts. So icosanoids, those are going to be your prostaglandins, prostacyclins, leukotrienes, all synthesized from arachidonic acid. Oh my gosh, I didn't actually talk about everything with eicosanoids somehow. Arachidonic acid comes from diacylglycerol and something. To get that conversion, we use phospholipase A. Phospholipase A is the target of glucocorticoid drugs. Glucocorticoids are good in the short term, less so in the long term. They cause immune suppression and something else. Yeah, so glucocorticoids. So phospholipase A catalyzes the reaction into arachidonic acid. Arachidonic acid can go into COX-1, COX-2, or 5-LOX. COX-1, COX-2 takes you to prostaglandins, prostacyclins, and something else, I think. And then 5-LOX takes you to leukotrienes. Leukotrienes are mainly associated with inflammation in the lungs. We think asthma, or we're thinking asthma in that case. Prostaglandins, prostacyclins, those are going to be your inflammation type things, your pain type things. So when we target pain and inflammation, we're targeting COX-1 or COX-2 or both. Eicosanoids are important just generally because they help our epithelial barrier protection, which is the main immune system thing. Vasodilation, vasoconstriction, edema can be caused, immune cell activation, neutrophil, eosinophil, mast cell. We have the 4 ors of inflammation. We have rubor, tubor, color, and dolor. Rubor is redness due to vasodilation, extra blood equals red. Tubor is swelling, extra dilation equals extra water out. Not really. Swelling, edema. Color, we think fever. Fever is an immune reaction to try and kill shit, bacteria and stuff. And then dolor is increased nociception, so the awareness of pain. So that's eicosanoids, what they do. COX-1, we think of it with the gastric mucosa and the platelets. It tells our gastric mucosa to not die and to make mucus. At the same time, that LOX is activating and recruiting neutrophils. It is increasing our gastric enzymes from chief cells and increasing hydrochloric acid from parietal cells, which are damaging. But we have the protection from COX-1, so it's all good. If I block COX-1, all my arachidonic acid is shunted to LOX, and we only have damage occurring, no protection, meaning I can get gastric ulcers. Another thing with COX-1 is we think of it in platelets. COX-1 is going to cause platelet aggregation and vasoconstriction. So the receptor for the platelets is TXA2, which is under the control of COX-1. So if we fuck with that, our good signal, PGI2, is blocked, meaning everything is shunted to TXA2, where we get vasoconstriction, platelet aggregation. Blood clots aren't great for you, in case you were wondering. For COX-2, we see it in joints, soft tissues, also the platelets. COX-2 is what blocks. Oh, that's actually what I meant to say. So COX-1 in platelets causes COX-1 in platelets is why we give you aspirin if you have had clots in the past, because it inhibits TXA2. Therefore, PGI2 is in charge. However, if I give you a COX-2, which is a COX-2 inhibitor, I block your PGI2, which is under the control of COX-2. Therefore, we are shunted over to TXA2 with vasoconstriction and platelet aggregation. That equals blood clot. Blood clot can equal heart issues. Womp womp. So COX-1 and COX-2 inhibitors, NSAIDs, are good at reducing pain and inflammation. We are at a risk for gastric ulcers. COX-2 inhibitors, pain and inflammation go down, at a risk for adverse cardiac effects. For glucocorticoids, we stop everything at the fucking beginning, but we can cause a lot of long-term peripheral catabolism because glucocorticoids, their entire function in life is to maintain the glucose concentration in your brain at whatever cost. So we will catabolize our peripheral body, will break down amino acids, shunt it to the liver, gluconeogenesis, we make glucose, it goes to our brain's happy, whatever. So we don't want to do that for the long term. Then I think that's it for icosanoids. Acute kidney injury. If I open your afferent arteriole, that one I'll also look into because that one doesn't make sense to me. Then cell signaling dynamics, amplification, measurement, modification, amplification, second messengers. It also allows integration and modulation. Measurement, I think this is the one that we're talking about. EC, yeah. So with measurement, how much a signal is being measured, E max is the concentration of a ligand where it gives you half of the maximal response. EC50 is the concentration of a ligand where it gives you 50% of the effect. So what concentration do you need to get half the effect versus what concentration do you need to get half of your response? So how potent something is related to EC50. How efficacious something is related to Emax. So if something is more potent, it's going to shift your Michaelis-Menten graft to the left because you need less concentration. If it's less potent, it's going to go to the right because you need more concentration. If something is more efficacious, your Michaelis-Menten goes up. Less efficacious, your Michaelis-Menten goes down. Yeah. And then signal modification with agonist or antagonist. We have agonist, bind, cause a reaction. Antagonist, bind, do not cause a reaction. We have different types of agonists. So agonists, we have a full agonist. Your exogenous is equivalent to your endogenous. Partial agonist, your exogenous is like fine, but not as good as endogenous. Super agonist, your exogenous is way fucking better than your endogenous. And then inverse agonist, where your agonist caused the opposite effect of intended. Then we have antagonists. They bind, do not cause a response. We have competitive antagonists, where they bind at the binding site, blocking your agonist. Then we have non-competitive antagonists, where they bind at an allosteric site and kind of shut down your receptor. We can have reversible antagonists, where there is a measurable rate where your antagonist will come off and things can happen. Or there's an irreversible. We can have practically irreversible, where you just miss your window of opportunity and then your antagonist comes off. Or we can have like genuinely irreversible, where your antagonist is like covalently bound to your, apparently 2 hours is the max you can record in one go. It cut me off mid-yawn. Rude. Almost done though. I fucking think. So that was signaling dynamics. Now we're at receptor pharmacology. That's where we're talking about pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics. Kinetics is what does your body do to the drug. Dynamics is what does your drug do to the body. Kinetics, we're thinking of padme. So we have absorption, distribution, metabolism, excretion. Dynamics, we're thinking of binding, activation, and systemic response. We have in vitro, where we are looking at drug receptor interactions. We do binding studies there, where we are just looking at does the receptor or does the drug have affinity for the receptor? I don't give a fuck about the response. Does it do anything? Or I don't care if it does anything. I just care if it binds. Hi, Daisy. And with that, we are looking at KD. KD is the ratio of how long it takes for it to bind versus how long it takes to get off, which is affinity. We can compare affinity and potency. They are not always related, sometimes they are, but if you have a low KD, you have a high affinity, so it takes less to do something. If you have a high KD, you have a low affinity, so it takes more to do something. So that's that. And then KD KD is also the concentration where half of your receptors are activated, which is where we get the affinity thing. I was like, why does that make no sense to me right now? That'd be why. So binding study is KD, concentration study is EC50. We're looking at what concentration gives me half my maximal response. In vivo, so we're looking at the systemic effects now. We get dose response studies. So rather than a concentration, we're looking at a dose now. So mgs per kg, mgs per meter squared for surface area, whatever. So that's dose response. What dose can I give you to give you therapeutic effects, which is ED50? What dose do I give where 50% of my population has therapeutic effects? TD50, what dose do I give where 50% of my population has toxic effects? And LD50, what dose do I give where 50% of my population has lethal effects? The ratio of LD50 to ED50 is your therapeutic index. A larger therapeutic index means that you have a safer drug. You can overdose somebody way more and it's fine. A lower therapeutic index means you have a very narrow dosing range, so you can be more careful. So that's that. We can also talk about ED99, where 99% of your population has therapeutic effects. And we can talk about LD1, which is what dose does 1% of my population die. So we can either measure our therapeutic index through ED50 and LD50 or ED99 and LD1. So there's that. So then we have the concept of spare receptors, which you better not ask a super conceptual question on that, because I can tell you conceptually, I cannot tell you practically. So spare receptors in a system that is very important to your body, so your blood pressure, your heart rate, whatever, it will have backup receptors to where if a irreversible non-competitive antagonist somehow binds to your normal receptors, the job can still get done because you have backups. So if our EC50 and KD are the same, that tells me that I have a 1-to-1 response of my signal to receptor, right? So my potency is equivalent to my affinity. It's an ideal world, doesn't happen like that. What can happen is my EC50 is lower than my KD, meaning my potency is higher than my affinity. I need less of my drug to activate half my receptors. When that happens, the rate limiting step is the signaling event rather than the receptor binding. With a limiting step of signaling, that tells me that there are extra receptors. Extra receptors is how we can get fucked sometimes in like anesthesia for pheochromocytomas. And then for cell signaling, which we literally just went through, I'm not going to talk through that again. We've been through it. Okay. Tomorrow, I need to go through apoptosis and oncogenes, and then oxygen. How oxygen kills you, basically. And then I will be ready to rock and roll for the exam tomorrow. Fingers crossed. So, that was a lot. My voice hurts a little bit. I'm tired. I'm hungry. I need to wash off my makeup. I want to go to bed. So I'm going to do that. So, thank you for letting me ramble. Can't believe my last recording shut me off. Cock blocked by my own phone. So that's fine. So, yeah. I don't know. Have a nice night.